For 3 years after we married, Robert Miller would change girlfriends every month to force me to divorce him. The 99th time he brought up divorce, I hid the pregnancy test results and promised to leave in a year. The next day, he and his David were in an accident, one dead, one injured. I suppressed my grief and performed the mourning and funeral service for Robert Miller, only to faint at the cemetery. In my days, I heard his argument with Mrs. Miller. Eleanor just got pregnant, and you're faking your death to impersonate David? Are you insane? Robert Miller lowered his voice, hysterical. This is fate. Heaven is helping me get rid of this nuisance. Mom, you knew I always loved Sarah Jenkins, but you forced me to marry Eleanor Vance. This is perfect now. I'll love Sarah Jenkins properly for David. If Eleanor Vance likes staying in the Miller family, then she can stay here as a widow. As for the child, just consider it a gift from me to her. I clenched my fingers tight, not letting the tears fall. Robert Miller didn't know I was willing to marry him, willing to have his child, simply to repay a debt. Since the benefactor was dead, the debt was settled. Robert Miller, you scoundrel. Aren't you afraid Sarah Jenkins and Eleanor will find out? How will you get out of this then? Facing his mom's scolding, Robert Miller scoffed, completely indifferent. Did you think those women I dated were just for show? Mom, you probably don't know, they were all David's girlfriends. He'd get tired of them and make me clean up his mess. None of them figured out I wasn't David, let alone Sarah Jenkins and Eleanor Vance. David married the woman I loved but didn't cherish her, and even cheated while using my name. So why can't I use his name and grow old with Sarah Jenkins? Mom, you should be celebrating. Now the first branch has Sarah Jenkins and me to give you grandchildren, and the second branch has that fool Eleanor Vance to give you grandchildren. M.R.S. Miller was so angry her breathing was unsteady. She cursed him for ruining my life and then going on to ruin Sarah Jenkins's. He cursed back disdainfully. I never ruined Eleanor Vance, it was her own fault, asking for it, climbing into my bed again and again to seduce me. I'm not someone not easily tempted. Why would I say no to something offered on a silver platter? If she hadn't serviced me so well every time, I wouldn't have let her keep that child in her belly. Doesn't she love me? Then she can stay in the Miller family and be a widow with that child. My fingernails broke in my palms. Releasing my hand, I saw a bloody mess. So, in Robert Miller's heart, I was that worthless. And his fierce torment of me in bed, time and again, wasn't, as I'd thought, a sign of his heart warming up. Tears slid down uncontrollably. The argument between mother and son was interrupted by a doctor entering the room. Perhaps seeing my pitiful state, Mrs. Miller instructed the doctor to do everything to save the fetus in my womb. She also repeatedly ordered Robert Miller to stay and keep me company. But he coldly refused. I'll hire a caregiver for her. What sense does it make for a David to look after his sister-in-law? People would laugh if that got out. Mrs. Miller hit him a few times, but she couldn't keep him from leaving to be with Sarah Jenkins. Long after he left, I slowly opened my eyes. Catching sight of my red-rimmed eyes, Mrs. Miller immediately lowered her head, guilty, avoiding my gaze. Eleanor, you're not alone now. You have to be strong, even if it's just for the child. Since marrying into the Miller family, Mrs. Miller hadn't treated me poorly. I didn't want to make things difficult for her. If Robert Miller hadn't saved me from the car accident back then, my grave would be overgrown by now. Robert Miller's older brother, David Miller, was naturally infertile. To keep the Miller family from worrying, I'd kept this secret for him. I even privately helped him try to improve his health, but it had no effect. Seeing that Sarah Jenkins hadn't gotten pregnant, Mrs. Miller placed all her hopes for grandchildren on me. To prevent the Miller family line from ending, I put aside my dignity and did everything I could to pursue Robert Miller. But all of this, in Robert Miller's eyes, was me asking for it. Now, he was impersonating David and living happily with Sarah Jenkins. I supposed good news about a new addition to the Miller family would arrive soon. Feeling a painful pull in my abdomen, I knew this child might not survive. Mom, don't worry, I'll be strong. Apart from life and death, everything else is just a scratch. Fortunately, it wasn't too late. Mrs. Miller comforted me for a long time, leaving only when the caregiver arrived. As she left, she didn't forget to tell me to take my medication to preserve pregnancy on time. I smiled. After she left, I threw the pills down the drain. A doctor came for rounds. I asked them to prescribe me a medical abortion. Eleanor, you don't want this child? This is your husband's posthumous child, how could you? I knew why they were confused. To outsiders, I loved Robert Miller so much that without this child, I might try to end my life. Logically, I should fight to keep the child and give birth. But this child shouldn't come into this world. I didn't want my child to be a tragedy, unloved, like me. The medicine went down my throat. In just one short night, the child left me. As dawn broke, I fell into a heavy sleep. But I was woken by a sharp pain in my arm. Opening my eyes, I met Robert Miller's anxious gaze. Draw some more. My wife is waiting for her Rh-negative blood to save her life. I struggled fiercely, preventing the needle from successfully entering my arm. Robert Miller's face immediately darkened. Eleanor, Sarah Jenkins had a complication and urgently needs a blood transfusion. The blood bank doesn't have Rh-negative blood. Right now. I clutched my punctured arm and sneered. David and I were never close. How would you know I have Rh-negative blood? I stared at him intently, waiting for his answer. Robert Miller couldn't help but feel a bit guilty, his ears turning red as he pleaded with me. Eleanor, you've always been generous. I only learned your blood type from your colleagues and came to trouble you out of desperation. The emergency nurse next to him, who wasn't familiar with me, how could she possibly know my personal information? If she knew I was pregnant and had just miscarried, she wouldn't have helped. Robert Miller explained. Dr. Vance, your sister-in-law has a ruptured corpus luteum, and it's an emergency. Can you? So, David Miller's body wasn't even cold, and Robert Miller couldn't wait to go sleep with his wife. But no matter how generous I was, I couldn't bring myself to ruin my body, which had just suffered a miscarriage, to clean up his mess. I just miscarried last night, I can't donate. Go find your ex-girlfriend. I remember she had Rh-negative blood. At the mention of his ex-girlfriend, Robert Miller paused, a flicker of memory in his eyes, followed by fury. What are you talking about? I don't have an ex-girlfriend. If you don't want to donate, just say so. Why slander me like this? He was close to being exposed and was lashing out in anger. I didn't want to pretend anymore and directly named the girl, that girl who always wore red dresses, Stephanie Reed. When you broke up with her, didn't she say she'd do anything for you, even die? Robert Miller's forehead veins throbbed. He threw my water glass against the wall. Eleanor Vance. Are you insane? I'm David Miller, your David, not that playboy husband of yours. No wonder you can't keep a man. Look at how crazy you are. What man could stand that? He didn't care at all that I said I had miscarried. It was as if the child in my belly wasn't his. He was solely focused on getting my blood for his Sarah Jenkins, even willing to curse himself. I know you can't accept the grief of losing your husband, but please look carefully. I'm David Miller. As long as you're willing to donate blood to save Sarah Jenkins, your child, once born, can call me Dad. Ignoring my pale face, he forcefully restrained me, telling the nurse to hurry and draw the blood. All my struggles were useless. Considering he had saved my life, I decided this was the last time I would repay the Miller family's debt. I suppressed my panic, letting the crimson blood flow into the blood bag. After drawing the blood, he didn't even say thank you before grabbing the blood bag and rushing away. Looking at his frantic back, I whispered softly, Robert Miller, we're even now. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I completely fainted on the bed. When I woke up again, my colleague, Emily Carter, was giving me 4 fluids while scolding me. When are you going to wake up from being so love-struck? That scumbag Robert Miller is dead. Why are you still bothering with his family? Your husband was just buried yesterday, and David and his wife are already in the emergency room? Anyone who didn't know would think they got married last night. I couldn't help but scoff. For Robert Miller, last night was practically a new marriage, wasn't it? He had finally outlived his brother and gotten rid of me, that nuisance. He must have been ecstatic to finally become Sarah Jenkins's husband, as he'd always wished. Seeing me laugh, Emily Carter thought I was about to defend Robert Miller again and immediately squeezed my lips shut. You're not allowed to talk. I'm going to yell some sense into you today. Robert Miller is dead. Maybe that's just karma for his philandering. If you ask me, none of the Miller men are any good. It's already ridiculous that David and his wife almost died on the same day as his brother's funeral procession, and then they come asking for your blood? ISN. Your life worth anything? Even if Robert Miller saved your life back then, you've worked like a dog for him all these years, that debt should be repaid. Now he's dead and the child is gone, you can finally start your life over. I smiled, listening to Emily Carter champion me, and spoke hoarsely, don't worry. From today on, I'll only live for myself. Hearing me relent, Emily Carter was shocked. She felt my forehead to make sure I wasn't talking nonsense, then hugged me and comforted me. Eleanor, you've finally come to your senses. Not only had I come to my senses, I was going to leave forever. After Emily Carter left, I made a phone call. Daniel, do you still mean what you said about marrying me last time? There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by pure joy. Yes. Always. You know I'll only marry you. I'm coming back to get you right away. Daniel Hayes was in Africa and probably didn't know I was widowed. But his words were enough. You don't need to come back. Wait for me for half a month. I'll sort everything out and come to Africa to work with you for Doctors Without Borders. Just as I finished speaking, Robert Miller pushed the door open, holding chicken soup. Not wanting Daniel Hayes to worry, I quickly hung up. You're pregnant. How can you go to Africa? It turned out he hadn't heard a word I said about miscarrying yesterday. David, you misheard. The unfamiliar address made Robert Miller pause in setting down the chicken soup. Oh, yeah, about this morning, thank you. This is chicken soup Mom made for you and Sarah Jenkins. Drink it while it's hot. His tone was cold. He put down the chicken soup and left quickly, as if afraid I'd discover his secret. Over the next few days, Robert Miller didn't show up again. I used the time to hand over my work to colleagues. Mrs. Miller, on the other hand, would occasionally stop by to chat with me. Mrs. Miller was still immersed in the joy of expecting a grandchild. I didn't bother telling her the truth. She knew Robert Miller loved Sarah Jenkins. She shouldn't have used his life-saving kindness to force me to marry him. After being discharged from the hospital, I went home and started packing. Robert Miller didn't love me. There wasn't a single item he'd given me in the entire house. Most of the things in the house were items I had carefully chosen and bought myself. Those with good meaning and various couples items no longer needed to exist. I called a junk collector and had her clear everything out, packing it all up and taking it away in one truck. The collector looked at the almost brand new items, full of regret. Miss, are you really throwing all this away? My husband died. These things are useless if I keep them. The collector patted my shoulder in comfort, gave me a cash gift, and then left. In just half a day, the home I had once thought would be my harbor was empty. When Robert Miller entered with Sarah Jenkins, they both stared at the empty house, stunned. Why is everything gone? The person's dead, keeping that junk is useless. I don't know which word angered Robert Miller, but he snapped at me with a cold face. My brother died, and you can't wait to throw away his things? Is that what you call loving him? I was taken aback. Was he upset that I threw things away? I didn't even want him. I'd even gotten rid of his child with one dose of medicine, so why would I keep these eyesores? I hadn't burned the house down. That was already good enough. Sarah Jenkins clung to Robert Miller's arm intimately, whining, David, why are you being so mean to your sister-in-law? Don't forget, she's still pregnant. Her tone immediately dispelled the dark look on Robert Miller's face. He put his arm around her waist, dotingly stroked her nose, his eyes holding a tenderness I had never seen before. After they finished their display of affection in front of me, Sarah Jenkins urged him to get to the point. Robert Miller then said to me, to thank you for saving Sarah Jenkins, my wife and I are hosting dinner tonight and would like you to join us. I had no interest in watching them show off their love in front of me and coldly refused. But Sarah Jenkins wouldn't take no for an answer and insisted on taking me out for a nice meal to cheer me up. At the restaurant, Robert Miller ordered a table full of Sarah Jenkins's favorite dishes, recounting them like treasured possessions. Not a single dish was one I liked. It wasn't surprising. From the moment Mrs. Miller forced him to marry me, he detested me completely. The little bit of kindness he showed when he saved me had turned entirely into hatred. The meal was tasteless. Halfway through, I excused myself, saying I had something to do, and left first. Unexpectedly, late that night, the traffic police came to me. "Are you Miss Eleanor Vance? You're suspected of hit and run. Please come with us." When I was taken away, I was completely bewildered. But my arguments were unconvincing. This was because after I got home, I had opened a bottle of red wine due to my restless thoughts. The police became even more convinced I was drunk driving and fled the scene after hitting someone. When I arrived at the police station and saw Robert Miller and Sarah Jenkins there, I had a bad feeling. Robert Miller stared at the flush on my face and pointed at me righteously. "Officer, it was my sister-in-law who hit someone. We told her not to run, but she wouldn't listen." Even though my head was spinning, I saw Sarah Jenkins's tightly clasped hands and knew I was being framed by Robert Miller. I slapped his hand away from my face and retorted, "Which I saw me hit someone." It was clearly Sarah Jenkins driving without a license. I exposed the truth, and Robert Miller's eyes were filled with fury. But he suppressed it, patting his chest and telling the police that I had just lost my husband and was emotionally unstable, so drunk driving and fleeing was a normal reaction. The victim's family member nearby also pointed at my face and said I was the one who hit his wife. Adding that I tested positive for drinking, everything seemed perfectly reasonable. No matter how I explained, it was useless. I was detained. Robert Miller lectured me heartbrokenly, saying he would talk to the victim's family on my behalf, and then quickly left with a startled Sarah Jenkins. On the 5th day of my detention, I suffered an unexpected injury due to a dispute among fellow inmates. A broken toothbrush was plunged into my abdomen, and blood flowed everywhere. By the time I was taken to the hospital, I was in shock. In my hazy state, I seemed to hear Robert Miller yelling at the doctors, "No matter what you do, you must save her child." In the endless darkness, I let out a self-mocking laugh. Why would Robert Miller care about whether I lived or died? He and Sarah Jenkins would have their children, so why would he care about mine? Then came the sound of slapping, as if Mrs. Miller was scolding him. When I woke up again, Robert Miller was staring at my lower abdomen, his eyes bloodshot. A chill ran down my spine. Seeing that I was awake, he suddenly leaned closer and asked coldly, "Eleanor Vance, you kept saying you loved me, my brother. Why didn't you protect his posthumous child?" Before I could answer, Sarah Jenkins's lunchbox clattered to the ground at the hospital room door. "David, what are you doing with your sister-in-law?" From her angle, Robert Miller looked like he was lying on top of me. Without needing me to push him, he quickly moved away from me and hastily explained to Sarah Jenkins, "Wife, I was just helping her with the blanket, don't misunderstand." Sarah Jenkins didn't believe him and ran off crying. Robert Miller chased after her without a second thought to comfort her and never came back. 3 days had passed since I prom. Is Daniel Hayes? I'd wait 10 days. I quickly found my phone and saw it was indeed full of his calls and messages. To prevent him from worrying, I could only ask him to wait a few more days for me. Because of my injury, Mrs. Miller paid to settle the traffic accident case with the victim. The day I was discharged, she hugged me with red eyes. "Eleanor, it's okay that the child is gone, as long as you're okay." She brought me home and put a peace charm she'd gotten from a temple on me. She also made a table full of my favorite dishes to celebrate my discharge. Before she left, she insisted I drink the warm milk she had prepared. Soon after, I felt something was wrong with my body. An abnormal heat overwhelmed me, leaving me in disbelief. I didn't understand why Mrs. Miller would drug me. Not long after, Robert Miller slipped into my house in the middle of the night and got into my bed. Enduring the discomfort, I grabbed the bedside lamp and smashed it on his head. While he was unconscious, I dragged him out of the room. Unexpectedly, this was witnessed by Sarah Jenkins, who had come looking for him. Seeing me dragging a half-naked Robert Miller, she became enraged and slapped me. "Eleanor Vance, what are you doing? knocking out my husband in the middle of the night and dragging him into your house. Relieved to have someone take over, I threw my hands up and told her coldly, "Control your man. If I find him climbing into my bed again, believe it or not, I'll cripple him." I just wanted to tell her that neither Robert Miller nor David Miller were good men. But Sarah Jenkins rushed forward, grabbed my hair, and slammed my head hard against the wall. Having just been discharged and exhausted from dragging Robert Miller, I was completely helpless against her. Robert Miller, meanwhile, slowly regained consciousness. He watched Sarah Jenkins, like a shrew, slam my head against the wall, just observing coldly, "Eleanor Vance, you've disappointed me too much. You can't treat me like Robert Miller and try to impregnate yourself just because the child is gone. Do you have any respect for him?" Dizzy and disoriented, I couldn't utter a single word. While he was unconscious, I had seen his purpose in climbing into my bed from his phone before the screen locked. He was clearly following Mrs. Miller's instructions to get me pregnant so I would stay in the Miller family forever. Now, it was twisted into me coveting him. By the time Sarah Jenkins finished venting her rage, my head was covered in blood. Robert Miller looked at my pathetic state and seemed to feel a flicker of pity, offering to call an ambulance. But Sarah Jenkins dragged him away by the ear. "I knew she was always thinking about you. Turns out you're the one always giving her attention. Don't you know she just lost her husband, and seeing your face just reminds her of him? Why do you keep going near her?" Robert Miller's eyes were gentle as he let Sarah Jenkins berate him, repeatedly apologizing and saying he was wrong. It turned out that the high and mighty Robert Miller I knew could be so submissive when facing the woman he loved. I looked away, quickly treated my wounds, and headed straight for the airport. I couldn't stand to stay in this place for another minute. As soon as I arrived at the airport, Robert Miller's calls flooded my phone. Seeing the phone ringing incessantly, I blocked Robert Miller immediately. Then he started sending me messages. "Eleanor, I vaguely remember, I might have been sleepwalking last night. I don't know how I got into your house. Maybe it was Robert who missed you so much he came into my dream and told me to check on you." The other side kept typing. Looking at his weak explanation, I felt only weariness. Was he afraid I'd expose the truth about him climbing into my bed last night? But I didn't quite understand. If he loved Sarah Jenkins, shouldn't he remain faithful to her? He hated me so much, how could he want both? However, since I had decided to leave, I had no interest in exploring his thoughts. After blocking all of Robert Miller's contact information, I snapped my SIM card and boarded the plane directly. Originally, I needed to prepare a lot for going to Africa. But Daniel Hayes told me he had everything ready and I just needed to go. As the plane ascended above the clouds, I looked down at the city where I had lived for decades and whispered softly, "Goodbye. Never to see it again." After landing, Daniel Hayes was already waiting at the airport. The moment he saw me, he smiled and walked towards me. But his bright eyes were full of worry. "Eleanor, Emily Carter told me about your injury. Why didn't you recover in the US first? You know what the medical situation is like here." I didn't point out that he had been eagerly awaiting my arrival. I smiled and told him I was fine. But he was still worried. As soon as we got in the car, he immediately took me to the best hospital in the area for a full checkup. Seeing the scar on my abdomen, his eyes turned red with anger. "The Miller family is really too much. What gives them the right to bully a widow like you?" Mentioning Robert Miller, Daniel Hayes realized his slip of the tongue and cautiously apologized to me. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I spoke without thinking. The deceased is gone. You need to look forward." "Daniel, I have something to tell you." What wasn't convenient to say on the phone, I should make clear to Daniel Hayes now that we had met. We had been fond of each other back then, but just as things were getting serious, I had an accident. Mrs. Miller told me that I should repay the life-saving kindness by marrying into the family, and I chose to suppress my hidden feelings and married Robert Miller. But Daniel Hayes was heartbroken by this and immediately applied to become a Doctors Without Borders volunteer in Africa. I thought we were simply fated to be apart and settled into being a good wife to Robert Miller. But the man who had bravely saved me, the man who had taken me to the hospital and stayed by my side for days, changed completely after our wedding night. Robert Miller cursed me for being ungrateful, but would apologize after Mrs. Miller scolded him. Mrs. Miller said he loved me, and naive as I was, I believed her. But in our life together, as he changed women like clothes, I finally knew that to Robert Miller, I was just a woman he had saved on a whim. It wasn't, as Mrs. Miller claimed, that he loved me enough to risk his life for me. Since he didn't love me, I would repay the debt in another way. I secretly helped David Miller with his infertility issues and took care of the Miller family's health in my spare time. But Mrs. Miller wasn't satisfied, she only wanted grandchildren. Thinking of David Miller's infertility showing no signs of improvement, I once again compromised myself, trying my best to please Robert Miller to give the Miller family an heir. When Daniel Hayes learned that I wasn't happy in my marriage, he had asked me several times to divorce Robert and marry him. I didn't respond. I had already disappointed him by marrying someone else. I had no right to ruin his life further. I thought time would make Daniel Hayes forget me, while I, always mindful of that life-saving kindness, planned to give the Miller family an heir before leaving. But in the end, Daniel Hayes was still waiting for me, and I had ended up in this state. The moment I learned the truth about Robert Miller faking his death, I suddenly felt relieved and no longer fixated on repaying the debt. Everything seemed to be the best arrangement. Not wanting to deceive Daniel Hayes, I told him everything. Hearing that Robert Miller hadn't died at all but had instead impersonated his brother and gotten together with Sarah Jenkins, Daniel was furious. Scoundrel! Animal! If he didn't love you, why did he marry you? I understood Danny L. Hayes's anger. If Mrs. Miller hadn't selfishly wanted Robert Miller to marry me to sever his love for Sarah Jenkins, Daniel Hayes, and I might have had children by now. Daniel, if you mind my past, just consider what I said earlier a joke. After all, I'm not worthy. But Daniel Hayes avoided my injury and carefully hugged me tight. Eleanor, I won't allow you to say that about yourself. You deserve the best of everything in this world. He, Robert Miller, is not worthy of you. None of the Miller family are any good. Believe me, they'll get their comeuppance eventually. Feeling Daniel Hayes's warm embrace and smelling the disinfectant on him, I felt safe for the first time. After leaving the hospital, Daniel Hayes brought me home. I had expected conditions in Africa might be difficult, with poor accommodation. But Daniel Hayes, upon learning I was coming to Africa, had spent a lot to buy the best detached house with a yard in the local area. All the furnishings and items in the house were in styles I liked. The daily necessities were all new. And they were all couples items. Warmth surged in my heart. This was the first time in 3 years I had smiled from the bottom of my heart. Daniel Hayes stared at me blankly, his eyes turning red involuntarily. Eleanor, I haven't seen you smile like that in a long time. It's all my fault. If I had been with you then, that animal Robert Miller wouldn't have had the chance to be your hero, and you wouldn't have suffered so much. I took his hand and said softly, Daniel, it's not your fault. It's fate. Fate separated us, and now fate has brought us back together. Everything is just right. That evening, my mentor and other senior colleagues came over to celebrate me joining their team. Daniel Hayes put on an apron and cooked himself. Even after 3 years, he still remembered my preferences and didn't forget to cater to everyone else's tastes. He was so considerate, I didn't need to lift AF. Inger to help. Everyone else treated me like a princess, only letting me sit and rest. Everything felt like it had returned to 3 years ago. Dinner was filled with laughter and joy. After dinner, my mentors didn't mention the Miller family at all, focusing on telling me interesting stories about their time in Africa, making me laugh until tears streamed down my face. Immersed in the warmth, I thanked heaven for being kind to me. If I had fought tooth and nail to keep the child and given birth, perhaps my indecisive self wouldn't have been able to let go of that child. Someone, I don't know who, first mentioned my and Daniel Hayes' wedding, and everyone started to tease us. Daniel Hayes glared at them fiercely, telling them to keep it a secret. But from everyone's smiles and scattered words, I gathered that Daniel Hayes must have prepared a big surprise for me. He didn't say, so I didn't ask. After I had adjusted to the time difference and fully adapted to the local rhythm, I began to prepare for starting work at the hospital. Daniel Hayes told me not to rush, insisting I fully recover first. He took care of everything personally every day, not even letting me wash my clothes. so I rested at ease under his care. On a bright, sunny day, he took me to a rose field. He said he knew I loved roses, so he had leased this land and planted them for me himself. The breeze was gentle, and the roses fragrant. The vibrant red roses couldn't compare to the burning gaze Daniel Hayes directed at me. He took out a diamond ring and knelt on one knee. Eleanor, I've waited for this day for 3 years. Will you marry me? The young man who had lived in my heart since my youth, after many years, despite the changes, still loved intensely. What reason did I have to refuse? Wearing the diamond ring, we got our marriage certificate locally. Wedding preparations were also in full swing. Meanwhile, back in the Miller family's home in the U.S., after Sarah Jenkins dragged Robert Miller home by the ear, his knees gave out and he dropped to the floor. Wife, I was wrong, I think I was sleepwalking. But I never thought Eleanor Vance would be so bold, actually trying to knock me out and assault me. He raised his fingers and swore to Sarah Jenkins, wife, I promise I didn't let her get even a bit of advantage. Sarah Jenkins watched him quietly for a moment, then said indifferently, I believe you. It's getting late, let's sleep. That night, Robert Miller tried to make love to Sarah Jenkins, but was coldly pushed away. Robert Miller knew Sarah Jenkins was still jealous, and he regretted it immensely. Over the next few days, Robert Miller tried every way to make Sarah Jenkins happy. But he couldn't make her smile. He didn't understand why the usually gentle, kind, and generous Sarah Jenkins was so angry this time. He had already sworn to stay away from Eleanor Vance, so why couldn't he win her back? Until Mrs. Miller suddenly showed up in a panic, asking them where I had gone. It was then that Robert Miller remembered he hadn't seen me in days. He also remembered that night he and Sarah Jenkins left, I had a head full of blood. For some reason, a sense of unease and irritability welled up in him. But it was completely different from the frustration I usually caused him by clinging to him and refusing to divorce. He took out his phone to call me, only to find I had blocked him. He then opened his social media apps and sent me messages. A red exclamation mark pierced his heart. This was something that would never have happened before. Especially since he vaguely felt that Eleanor Vance might have recognized that he wasn't David Miller long ago. Back when he asked her to donate blood, why would she speak so bluntly and say Stephanie Reed was his ex-girlfriend? After all, on the surface, it was always Robert Miller who was involved with those women. But she loved him so much, given how she refused to divorce if she knew he wasn't dead and was impersonating David, she would definitely have caused a scene. Robert Miller suppressed his turbulent thoughts and rushed back to the house. The house was still the way he had left it. There were still bloodstains on the floor from when Sarah Jenkins had made me hit my head. But I was nowhere to be found in the house. And there was nothing left that belonged to me. It was as if I had never been in his life, never lived in that marital home. The panic he had just suppressed spread uncontrollably again. Ignoring Sarah Jenkins's attempts to stop him, he drove like a madman to the hospital where I worked. He couldn't find me and was covered in anxious sweat. A kind nurse told him I had already resigned, and he froze on the spot. Emily Carter happened to be on duty that day. Robert Miller immediately grabbed her and asked where I had gone. What do you want with Eleanor? The colleagues at the hospital who knew me were already aware that Robert Miller had faked his death and was impersonating David Miller. Seeing him looking for me, they all gathered around. Robert Miller looked at their unfriendly stares, the unease in his heart growing stronger. Do you know where she went? Emily Carter couldn't hold back and sneered at him. You're David, and you keep calling Eleanor by her first name? That's inappropriate. Besides, Eleanor lost her husband. Of course, she's going to remarry. She can't stay in the Miller family and be a widow forever, can she? Robert Miller's eyes turned red with urgency when he heard remarry. Impossible. She loved me so much, how could she remarry? As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew he had slipped up. But it was too late to salvage it. However, everyone, to his surprise, showed no expression of shock. Instead, the contempt and disgust on their faces became even more blatant. Under the scrutiny of their gazes, Robert Miller stammered, trying to force an explanation. I.J. UST misspoke. Eleanor loved my brother so much, how could she remarry? Emily Carter sneered, "You could fake your death and run off with your brother's wife, so why can't Eleanor remarry? Don't forget how many times you tried to force her to divorce you. Now she's granted your wish, you're not planning on having 2 wives, are you? I forgot to tell you, the child wasn't lost in detention. Eleanor got rid of it herself." Emily Carter's words were like a bucket of ice water, shocking Robert Miller, who was still trying to deny his identity. So, Eleanor Vance had known all along that he was faking his death and pretending to be David. But she hadn't exposed him, and she had even terminated their child. He had been hoping she would leave for 3 years. Just thinking about being married to her felt like a crime, like he was betraying Sarah Jenkins. Why did it hurt now, hearing these people say that Eleanor Vance had left and would never come back? Emily Carter looked at his pained expression and scoffed. "Oh, could it be that now that she's gone, Mr. Robert Miller regrets it and has realized he likes Eleanor too?" Robert Miller felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Like? How could he like Eleanor Vance? He had kept his heart and body clean for Sarah Jenkins, only to feel they had been defiled by Eleanor Vance. But a small voice deep inside kept telling him that he had immensely enjoyed the way Eleanor Vance did everything to please him in bed. He also couldn't forget the first time he saw Eleanor Vance, how drawn he was to her demeanor. That was why he had instinctively thrown himself in front of the car to save her. Even when he was severely injured, he had insisted on being in the same hospital room, watching over her for days. But before he could figure out this strange feeling, Mrs. Miller forced him to marry Eleanor Vance and even drugged them on their wedding night, locking them in the same room. He had married Eleanor Vance somewhat reluctantly, but the anger of being manipulated completely drowned out that flicker of attraction. He didn't know how he left the hospital. Back home, Sarah Jenkins looked at his sometimes painful, sometimes gleeful expression and immediately became furious. "David, what's wrong with you? Have you been possessed, falling for that little vixen Eleanor Vance? Let me tell you, I don't care about your other women, but don't even think about messing with your brother's wife." Robert Miller looked up sharply, in disbelief. So, Sarah Jenkins had known all along that her husband was a philanderer. Then could she also recognize that he wasn't David? But Sarah Jenkins started taking off her clothes, revealing sexy lingerie underneath. "I learned some new tricks recently, I guarantee you'll have fun." Saying that, Sarah Jenkins took out her phone and played a video. In the video, it was clearly Sarah Jenkins making love with other men. Robert Miller looked at her glazed-over eyes, and blood rushed to his head. He couldn't believe that Sarah Jenkins, who he thought was pure as a goddess in his heart, could. Anger made him clench his hands around her neck, demanding, "Sarah Jenkins, you cheated on me?" Now it was Sarah Jenkins's turn to be confused. She struggled to pull Robert Miller's hands away, gasping, "Are you crazy? Didn't you tell me to learn this?" Robert Miller's hands dropped powerlessly. He couldn't believe Sarah Jenkins loved his brother this much. But if she truly loved David, how could she not recognize that he wasn't David? Before, David had used his name to have affairs everywhere, and he had been angry, yelled, and cursed. But David had continued to do as he pleased. Unable to bear his beloved being betrayed, he had covered for David and cleaned up his messes time and again. And when he discovered David had gotten another woman pregnant and was planning to keep the child, he had orchestrated that accident. He wouldn't allow any other woman to hurt Sarah Jenkins. And he wouldn't allow David Miller to act so recklessly repeatedly. But now, all the facts were telling him that Sarah Jenkins knew David was a cheating scumbag. Then her going to have sex with other men for David Miller was probably just an excuse. What was he, Robert Miller, then? For her, he had killed his own brother, gotten rid of the illegitimate child that could have threatened Sarah Jenkins's position. For her, he had made Eleanor Vance endure the pain of losing her husband. For her, he had let Eleanor Vance go to jail and almost die. He had even watched Eleanor Vance get beaten until her head bled, for her sake, and done nothing. In the end, he was just a part of Sarah Jenkins and David Miller's game without even knowing it. He vaguely remembered what Eleanor Vance's colleague had said earlier that day, cursing the Miller family as no good. He actually felt they had been too lenient. He slapped Sarah Jenkins with all his might, then pressed her head to the floor, slamming it repeatedly. Sarah Jenkins was caught off guard and cried out in agony. But the anger in Robert Miller's heart still had nowhere to go. All he could think about was the tragic sight of Eleanor Vance getting her head slammed against the wall. Everything from the past flashed through his mind like a movie. At this moment, he regretted it immensely. And he was absolutely certain that, in this house, only Eleanor Vance had been truly sincere towards him. And he had driven her away with his own hands. Eventually, a neighbor heard Sarah Jenkins's cries for help and called the police, saving her. At the police station, when questioned about why he beat his wife, Robert Miller said blankly, "She's not my wife, Eleanor Vance is." The police frowned, and Sarah Jenkins, confused, cursed Robert Miller, telling him to stop playing games. "I'm not David Miller, I'm Robert Miller. The one who died in that accident was my older brother." Sarah Jenkins's cursing stopped abruptly. As she recalled recent events, she finally understood the reason for his recent strangeness. Finally, Mrs. Miller rushed to the police station and explained to the police that her son's mind had been unclear since his brother's death, and the matter was settled. But Robert Miller was no longer willing to pretend to be David Miller. Mrs. Miller couldn't stand it anymore and slapped him. "Now you know Eleanor was good. It's too late. I told you from the beginning not to play these games, but you wouldn't listen. Now look what's happened. Since Eleanor is already gone, just settle down and continue being David. Don't cause any more trouble for me." But Robert Miller didn't listen. He no longer went back to Sarah Jenkins's house, searching for me frantically every day. When he couldn't find me, he would drink heavily in the empty house. Until one day, he suddenly remembered I had mentioned going to Africa on the phone before. He immediately used his connections to check my exit records. Confirming I had gone to Africa, he finally felt alive again, vowing to chase after me and bring me back. But he didn't know, it was already too late. In the blink of an eye, it was our wedding day. I had told Daniel Hayes to keep everything simple, but he said our wedding should be grand. Due to our status, the local government specially approved us to lay red carpets throughout the main city area on our wedding day. The grand wedding procession I'd fantasized about became real as I sat in the bridal car. But I didn't expect to encounter Robert Miller on this day. He blocked the bridal car, like a lion whose treasure had been stolen. His chest was heaving violently with anger, but his voice was full of grievance. "Eleanor, why did you abandon me and marry someone else? Don't you know how hard I've been looking for you this past month?" Seeing him, Daniel Hayes was so angry he clenched his fists and immediately wanted to get out of the car and beat him up for me. Even my mentors and senior colleagues behind us wanted to vent their anger for me. It was a great day, and I didn't want it ruined by this scumbag, Robert Miller. I held back Daniel Hayes's hand on the car door, rolled down the window, and said lightly, "David, what's this all about? The Qing dynasty fell long ago. There's no law that says a woman can't remarry after her husband dies." Robert Miller looked at my cold demeanor, and pain welled up in his eyes. "Eleanor, I'm not David. I'm Robert Miller, your husband Robert Miller." I was startled, but I had no interest in finding out more. David must be joking. "Robert Miller is dead. I buried him myself." "Eleanor, you clearly knew I was Robert Miller all along. You knew I wasn't dead. How could you heartlessly terminate our child and then heartlessly abandon me?" Heartless? This accusatory look on his face, where was the fierceness he'd shown over the past 3 years trying to force me to divorce him? Instead, his usually cold eyes were now filled with deep affection. It inexplicably disgusted me. "David Miller, this is the last time I'll call you David. Today is my wedding, please move aside. If your wife finds out you're here, she'll be upset." To cut off his retreat and live as his brother David with Sarah Jenkins, Robert Miller had destroyed everything that could prove his identity. Now that he said he was Robert Miller, who would believe him? As long as the Miller family wasn't completely foolish, they wouldn't allow him to admit he was Robert Miller. Impersonating his own brother and taking over his sister-in-law would be enough to earn the Miller family ridicule for a lifetime. Unexpectedly, Robert Miller stepped forward and tried to latch onto the car door. "Eleanor, I was wrong. I shouldn't have played this joke on you. I really am Robert Miller. Please look at me, okay?" Daniel Hayes couldn't bear it any longer and was about to get out of the car. But before he could act, many locals following the wedding procession, upon learning that Robert Miller was trying to crash the wedding, stepped forward and pulled him away. In the rearview mirror, he struggled, shouting repeatedly, "Eleanor, you're my wife, you can't marry someone else." No one paid him any attention. With this incident, Daniel Hayes added more security at the wedding reception to prevent Robert Miller from causing trouble. But he still came. His appearance was even more pathetic, his clothes torn, one shoe missing, looking disheveled like a beggar on the street. He was stopped outside the banquet hall, watching helplessly as Daniel Hayes and I completed the wedding ceremony, crying uncontrollably. After the guests left, he still didn't give up, following our car along the red carpet until he found our house. I didn't understand what he wanted by harassing me like this now. I just felt sorry for Daniel Hayes. Our beautiful wedding had been disrupted by such a scumbag. Daniel Hayes didn't seem to mind, ordering people to guard the yard well and spending the night with me. We immersed ourselves in love all night. The lights in the house turned on and off and on. Robert Miller stood outside the yard all night. Just thinking that Eleanor Vance was now being pleasured by another man, he felt as if a pair of large hands were tightly gripping his heart, the pain making it hard to breathe. At this moment, he finally realized that, without knowing it, he had fallen in love with Eleanor Vance. But she had already married someone else. Over the next few days, Robert Miller tried everything to get close to me, but had no opportunity. Instead, I was so annoyed that I decided to talk to him once and for all. As soon as I stepped out of the yard, he plopped down onto his knees in front of me, striking his head on the ground with loud thuds. "Eleanor, I'm sorry. I was such a scoundrel before. I don't dare hope for your forgiveness. I just want to tell you face to face that I'm sorry." He hit his head too hard, and blood immediately flowed from his forehead. My first thought was that he had stained my doorstep. Seeing me frown, showing disgust, he frantically used his sleeve to wipe away the blood on the ground. "Eleanor, I was wrong. I shouldn't have taken advantage of your love for me and hurt you so carelessly." I interrupted him. "Robert Miller, I married you only because your mom said a life-saving kindness should be repaid by marrying into the family. I said I would leave in a year because your brother was infertile, and I wanted to give the Miller family an heir. If you hadn't saved me, and your mom hadn't forced me to marry you as repayment, I would have been with my husband 3 years ago." "So, you never loved me?" I met his disbelieving eyes and nodded calmly. His body stiffened, as if all strength had been drained from him. I stopped looking at him and closed the yard gate. I don't know when Robert Miller left, and I didn't care. Only later, when Emily Carter told me Robert Miller had turned himself in and went to prison, did I learn that he had killed his own brother for Sarah Jenkins. The laughable part was that Sarah Jenkins, as the family member, hired a lawyer to push for Robert Miller to be sentenced to death. After a moment of bitter amusement, Daniel Hayes and I went back to work at the hospital together, dedicating ourselves to saving lives. After work, we would go home together and share 3 meals a day.